It's been a long ass time since I did a religious hoedown. Honestly, I thought it might have been an annual Christmas tradition. Stupid naive sod that I was. Anyway, 4 years later I've decided that I've gotten around to doing the second one in the series. For those of you who weren't around 4 years ago, first of all, shame on you guys. Second of all, you might want to know a bit about this format of episode. Basically, I take 4 video games developed by members of, linked to, or sanctioned by a particular religion. There are certain rules that I try to follow when picking these games, but for some religions, pickings are slimmer than others. The gist of it is that I'd like to pick games that I feel can fairly represent a religion in some capacity. Obviously, games that are made to be hateful propaganda or piss off members of that religion aren't going to be considered, nor are games that are really loosely connected. In an ideal situation, it would be a game made about or for that religion, though I'll also accept games that are made in a country that is predominantly that religion, or is a game made about that religion but isn't connected to it in any tangible way, such as making of a profit. The games and religions are as follows: the Shivah, a point-and-click adventure based on Jewish culture; Ramayana, an RTS CRPG game based on Hindu mythology; Badiya, or Badiya, or delete where appropriate, a survival game based on Islamic culture developed in Saudi Arabia; and 5, The Guardians of David, a Bible game based on Christian and Jewish beliefs. I'm gonna call this one the Christian game, though it could fit in both categories to be honest. So let's dive into the world of religion-based video games and enjoy this culture-rich adventure. By that I mean, let's get overwhelmed with bugs and frustrated as hell with bad game design. Let's go! The Shivah is a very interesting game that got my attention as soon as I saw it. It's a Jewish point-and-click adventure about a rabbi who is investigating a murder. It was originally made in 2006, but got a remaster of some sort in the 2010s. The Shivah is the first game that was picked for me, and I'm really glad, because the game got me in the mood for this whole marathon. So the game starts up with a joke and some philosophical stuff that has a bit of significance to the plot, but not really. The joke is a bit of a hint as to how to handle a situation later down the line actually, but you'll probably see that in a bit. We open up with, it began as many things do, with a song. The Sound of Music is the only thing that comes to mind there. I mean, Friday the 13th didn't start with a song. So this kid's singing a song in Hebrew, whilst Rabbi Stone, who I affectionately call Detective Jew, just regrets everything that he's ever done. Rabbi Stone is our protagonist, and well, he has some rough edges which make him kind of interesting. Rabbi Stone is about to do a sermon on why bad things happen to good people, but manages to bum himself out to the point where he doesn't want to listen to it, so he fucks off halfway through it.
I can't do this. I'm sorry.
Rabbi?
You heard.
Huh? What?
Go home, Mrs. Raymer.
Is it over already?
Yeah.
Rabbi Stone, wait! You can't just stop.
Sure I can. Just watch me.
But
It's over, Josh.
you can't mean that.
Look, you're a good kid. You've got a good voice and a good future. Don't let me hold you back. Now do a mitzvah and call Mrs. Raymer a cab. Goodbye, Josh.
Almost immediately after, he gets a visitor who he can't dissuade to leave. They reveal themselves to be a detective, and this is where the game's main plot truly kicks off. So, Rabbi Stone's estranged flock member, Jack, has apparently been murdered. Whilst this is troubling in and of itself, there's an odd twist in this tale. Jack has apparently left Rabbi Stone $10,000 in his will, despite the fact that he hasn't spoken to the guy in 10 years due to a falling out. This has seemingly made Stone a suspect to the police because nobody can figure out why the hell he'd do this. Even Rabbi Stone's confused as to why the hell this has happened. We also get a glimpse into their past together, and it's hinted that they parted on less than amicable terms 10 years ago. Anyway, after calling him a bunch of names in Yiddish, the detective leaves, and it's time for me to put on the trilby over my kippa and become the hero that this story needs, Detective Jew. So I try to figure out the login to my own account, and fail miserably. Wow, my first case and I've already fucking failed it. But with several guest usernames, I try it again, and none of them seem to work. I found myself a little stumped here, looking around the office for clues. I found out eventually that your username is rstone and your password is apparently a Yiddish word for busybody. There's a clue about it, but you need to read your messages which are under your username and password as one would guess. So I don't know how you were supposed to figure this part out without a walkthrough. I'm readily available to admit to being an idiot at any point, but it's stuff like this that made me go to a walkthrough very early in the game, as I do a fair few point and click games. There is a fair bit of cryptic shit in this, I have to admit. So my altar boy, or whatever the Jewish version of that's called, was eavesdropping on the conversation and grills me about it. He asks if there will be a Shivah. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, that's how they pronounce it in the game. A Shivah, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a week-long mourning period for the family and community after a Jewish person dies. You might notice that this is the title of the game. This is because Detective Jew uses the Shivah as an excuse to snoop around the family and find out more about what's going on. Detective Jew has a bit of a moral dilemma because the money left to him can actually save his synagogue from financial turmoil. However, he feels incredibly guilty about having this money, seeing as it's, well, something akin to blood money. Rabbi Stone is actually quite a strong protagonist and a good character all around. He's a very flawed man as you learn more and more throughout the game. His flaws are well balanced to a point that he doesn't feel irredeemable or hateable at any point. He just seems like a man who has made some bad choices or difficult choices, and that stuff is still following him to this day. So after finally hacking into my own account, I'm able to find Jack's docs so I can go and annoy his wife. I scour Jew book and I'm able to find it along with an article about his murder. So we go to his wife's house who doesn't quite know who we are, and when she finds out, she's proper pissed. It's pretty understandable when you learn why, but I'll let the game reveal that. There's a pretty tentative relationship between Detective Jew and Mrs. Lauder that I actually kind of appreciate. They've got a very rocky alliance based on a mutual desire to find out more about what happened. It's at this point that we kind of understand a bit more about how the world outside sees Rabbi Stone. I do really appreciate how well rounded it makes him as a character. He doesn't feel like the perfect victim or another trapping that writers often fall into whilst writing a character from another culture. It makes him very tangible and relatable without going to ridiculous measures like making him a raging alcoholic or something. So I'm able to convince Mrs. Lauder to work with me, which is only possible if you use responses that aren't rabbinical in nature. Oh fuck's sake. Anyway, she's able to point me in the right direction by telling me where Jack's shop was. He was some sort of a tailor from what I can gather, or perhaps a fashion designer. As we get there, we kinda learn that latter was probably the more likely. Whilst there, we're able to figure out a few of his business associates' names and see that he was paying out to a guy named Joe DeMarco and someone else called Ethan Goldberg. So, you're gonna have to forgive me here because the recording on this part of the game completely fucked up and skipped. However, I went back to Mrs. Lauder's apartment and asked her about the names that I found. Ethan Goldberg is apparently an accountant who they hired to do their bookkeeping, but he's also been murdered. The other guy, Joe, is a mystery. One thing that's pretty funny is that Joe DeMarco is obviously not a very Jewish name, and you can grill literally everyone you meet after to find out if Joe is Jewish. I'd kinda like an alternative route for this game where you beat the shit out of everyone to find out if Joe is Jewish. So then we go and visit another rabbi, Amos Zelig, who was the rabbi to Ethan Goldberg and Jack Lauder before they were murdered. He's not very helpful, but he does advance the story, as visiting him does make Joe DeMarco come out of his little hidey hole, and we can find him at the tavern. There are some things about him that are suspect, like how he doesn't know Jack's name, or at least pretends not to, whilst also admitting to doing his funeral service a few days ago. So I channel my inner Zuckerberg and hack Amos Zelig's account and read his emails. Surprise, surprise, he was holding some shit back. A lot of his congregation members who were murdered seemingly reached out to him and were frantically asking him why he got them involved with these horrible people who turned out to be loan sharks. It's implied that the debts that they were killed over were orchestrated by Amos Zelig. From this moment on, he will be known as the infamous Rabbi Rotten. I have to admit, the logistics of Rabbi Rotten's plan do elude me. So he apparently convinces members of his congregation to get into debt and take loans from loan sharks that they cannot pay back, so the loan sharks can hire a hitman to take them out. I don't quite get who benefits from this scheme, except maybe Joe DeMarco, who has been making a killing in clientele. The mob seem to be out of pocket and just have a pile of dead creditors behind them, and Rabbi Rotten looks to be knee-deep in bodies and doesn't seem to be profiting in any meaningful way. I mean, I'm missing something because I don't quite get how this evil scheme works. I feel like there's a step that I've missed. So we go back to this bar which I visited before, but there was nothing of use here. And this time a guy in a grey hoodie walks in. It turns out that this is Joe DeMarco, who seems to insist that it's not the one we're looking for. But his goy mind tricks don't work on me, and I managed to convince him to just admit that he is Joe DeMarco. I'm then able to get him to convince me to let him lead me away from this populated bar to a tiny quiet corner where nobody can see or hear us. I'm sure that won't end badly at all. He leads me down to a subway platform only to reveal that he is going to murder me. Shocker. Fucking shocker. So I'm able to kick his ass with my boxing skills, getting a fair bit out of him as I go. I then get the option to either push him onto the train tracks or spare him. Sparing him actually does result in an impact on the story, but at this point I didn't quite know if it would or not, but I opted to spare him because Detective Jew isn't a killer. Not yet anyway. The dark side of the Yiddish is strong indeed, but I will not succumb to it this day. So I visit Mrs. Lauder and discover that the house is empty. She's missing and a note has been left behind by my arch nemesis, Rabbi Rotten. I have to go to Rabbi Rotten's apartment, which is a penthouse of some sorts on the far side of town. One thing that I really appreciate about this final showdown is how much of a threat Rabbi Rotten is. The game can end with him shooting both of you, though he ideally makes it want to look like an accident or a suicide. Refuses demands and he shoots Mrs. Lauder right between the eyes. Give in to them too much and he'll have you kill yourself. So you have to play it smart, and he is a genuine threat here. So I go along with his demands. For now. That way the hostage is out of the equation. It's then that Joe DeMarco bursts in and starts ranting at Rabbi Rotten, who just shoots him in the stomach and kills him outright. Thanks, Joe. You were a big help. Oh Jesus, I never figured out if he was a Jew. So in order to not get shot or pancaked, you have to play this right. The right approach is to try and grab his gun twice. This results in you getting shot in both arms. At this point, you take a seat on the ledge, take a moment to admire the view, and then whilst Rabbi Rotten is distracted, you snatch his gun off of him. Due to the weakness in your newly pierced arms, you drop the thing off the roof, but it is out the equation at least, and now you're on equal grounds in a fist fight. Rabbi Rotten is old, but you're wounded, so it balances out quite fairly. Now, I want us to take in the beauty of this entire situation. A game that is ending with an epic showdown which involves two rabbis having a punch-up on a rooftop. I shit you not, this is one of my favourite final showdowns of all time. This is how the Mass Effect trilogy should have ended. The cherry on the cake is the dialogue.
You think you can out-rabbi me?
You call yourself a Jew?
Honestly, if I could get in a pub car park brawl, you bet your ass that I'll be throwing those out there. You have to distract him by calling him out on his honour and his integrity and throwing a punch every now and then to weaken him. Eventually you knock him back into the far wall and have him at your mercy. Whilst he's on the ropes, he discusses what makes Jack leave Detective Jew's flock, and it's revealed that Detective Jew refused to consecrate his marriage to Mrs. Lauder because she's not a member of the Jewish faith. Jack was distraught by this and called him an arrogant Zionist, something that Detective Jew isn't that offended by or even feels the need to justify, as he feels that he needs to keep his faith alive by keeping marriage in the faith. I actually quite like this exchange because it's a major character flaw in Rabbi Rotten. He is quite intolerant. Neither of these two are really good rabbis, not on the level that they probably should be. One is a phony and the other one is as stubborn as a mountain goat, and I do really appreciate the complexity to this dynamic. After all of this, you have the choice between throwing Rabbi Rotten off the roof or sparing him by knocking him out. On my first playthrough I threw him off the roof because the evil tyranny of Rabbi Rotten needs to end here before he truly takes over. Not gonna lie, the animation made me laugh, just how he shoves him off and he keels over the edge. RIP Rabbi Rotten, you were the most worthy rival I've ever had. So this action gets you the bad ending to the game, where Mrs. Lauder doesn't seem to want anything further to do with you because she sees you as a dark man. This allows Rabbi Stone to hang up the detective garb and go back to his job as a rabbi. I like that the bad ending in this game doesn't have any stupid, "Oh, you did a bad thing so you randomly die," or "You did a bad thing so you lose control and do something dumb" endings. There are a few games that do this and it always disappoints me when they do. Also, you might want to shove Rabbi Rotten's soul in a diuk. I'm just saying, it might be a prudent idea to do that. The difference between the good ending and the bad ending is earning Mrs. Lauder's forgiveness. Her forgiveness allows you to move on and become a better person, or else you just stay the same person as you were at the start of the game. Rabbi Stone doesn't just become a better person instantly, but you get the impression that this is where he is heading. Whereas without her forgiveness, he's just likely to use Jack's money to hang on to his synagogue, but it's not likely to be the case that he'll grow, and it'll likely close in some time. There are multiple endings to this game and multiple variants as to who lives and dies, which I appreciate a fair bit, to be honest. There's also a game over ending where Rabbi Rotten kills you both, and honestly it's quite depressing and dark. We also know that Rabbi Rotten likely has no one to stop him now, so he is likely to build up a giant dictatorship and take over the world. I mean, he is an evil supervillain after all, it's to be expected. And that was the Shivah, a surprisingly good point-and-click adventure game with a cultural twist. I actually really like this game all around. It's visually a treat and has some nicely detailed pixel art. There's a fair bit of quality shading in the backgrounds, so the pixel formats looks more stylish than can't be arsed. The soundtrack is also quite nice. Whilst not especially memorable, it does create a nice tone and atmosphere, similar to something like Heavy Rain. Its subtlety is appreciated, even if that does mean that it goes unsung. The story is mostly decent with a strong protagonist and an interesting dilemma, but I feel that the criminal element feels a bit cartoony at times. As much as I love him, Rabbi Rotten has the depth and complexity of Robbie Rotten from Lazy Town, and his henchman Joe seems to be a bit of a better rounded character, but even he isn't that strong. Detective Jew and Mrs. Lauder are pretty well done characters however, and I did legitimately enjoy exploring their world and learning more about their characters. I did like the dynamic between them, and the antagonist, and how the protagonist has enough flaws to make him interesting but not damage his likability like a character like Patroclus Alexander, for instance. Some parts of the game are a bit cryptic, which is part and parcel for the genre, but there were some things that I'm glad I used the walkthrough for. Honestly, this is one of, if not my favourite game in the religious hoedown gimmick, and I'm legitimately hoping that other games follow suit. In fact, I actually think that this might be one of my favourite games I've covered for the show. I had a lot of fun editing all of this and constantly going over the Rabbi Rotten stuff, and Rabbi Rotten's become a sort of in-joke with my friends because of how fun it is as an idea. So, yeah, this one was legitimately great. What's the next one? Oh, no.
You think you can out-rabbi me?
You call yourself a Jew?
You think you can out-rabbi me?